let's talk about communications, messaging, and politics. Now, when you're trying to communicate a message, there are a number of tips and rules that any communications professional will tell you. There are things like simplicity, you can use repetition, it's about connecting to your audience in the way that they understand. There's really a playbook, and any communications professional worth their salt is going to tell you about the same type of things and be able to craft you a really, really good message. Now, if you're like me and you've been paying attention to some of the messages coming out of the government with regards to the COVID restrictions, you may have noticed a number of problems with the sort of inconsistency and the failure to really connect with messaging that is causing a lot of problems for individuals to try and really understand what are the rules, and that is a serious issue when you're trying to get the number of cases down. Now, my friend Andrew Lawton covered this on his show, and I think the real crux of it is somewhere around here where the government said you shouldn't really travel within your province in Ontario, and recently they canceled what is called social circles, and that's where you can have 10 people that you can connect with that are outside your family, so you pick those 10 people and you're only supposed to see those people. But on the other hand, the mall is still open. So you might say, okay, well, I'm not really supposed to travel within the province and I can't see you at my house, but I'll just see you at the mall for coffee. So a number of these things don't really make sense, and that makes it very, very difficult for Ontarians and people across the country who are getting this advice from Dr. Tam or from the other provincial medical officers of health. It makes it very, very difficult for them to not only understand what is going on, but to eventually trust what is going on. Now, you have many, many competing voices on this, and for example, again in Ontario, because I'm in Ontario, the Liberal leader wants to shut down bars, restaurants, and gyms. But if you think about this purely from a messaging and communications perspective, it actually does make some sense on a certain level, because he's saying, and the claim can be made, well, the numbers of cases are much, much higher than in the beginning. Then in the beginning of the pandemic, we are now at a much, much higher rate, even though the death rate is much lower, but that's a total separate thing, and you're not really supposed to talk about that, apparently. But this is a serious point that, well, if we closed everything before, we were in a total lockdown or near total lockdown before when the cases were much higher, why are we still leaving bars and restaurants and gyms open now? And it's a real serious point. If the counter to that, though, is that, well, now we know more about COVID, we have social distancing in practice, we have masks, we have all these things, that's going to be the counterbalance. That messaging needs to come out. Where is the messaging from this? Nobody knows. You combine that with the type of messaging that is coming out, and then you have, for example, here, there's not going to be body checking in the OHL, and so it's just a mixed bag of messaging. It's a very, very difficult job, I understand, because there's many, many moving parts, and I'm really not trying to criticize, in particular, the Ford government or any particular person there, because again, it's a very, very large thing. But the messaging needs to be consistent. You're making people confused by your lack of consistency and your lack of clarity and lack of simplicity. But what is it about politics that perhaps is driving this? Now, I have experience working in the communications field, but also in a political field, and so I'm able to kind of switch between both hats. In a political sense, when you put out messaging, you have, because of the way our government is set up with opposition parties, you have a built-in critic, and many times opposition parties really just oppose. They don't necessarily provide any, constructive criticism. They just do opposing, and as people get more polarized, it looks like they're just out there to oppose you no matter what you do. Even if you did the exact same thing that they had wanted you to do, they would come out with some criticism the next day of, you didn't do it good enough, you didn't do it fast enough, you didn't do it whatever enough. So you have sort of a built-in critic. But that affects the messaging. And I saw this firsthand when I was in the Ontario legislature, and it was the first day that the legislature was sitting again. And the Ford government got pretty hammered by questions from the opposition about their record on school safety during COVID. Now, you might say, okay, well, that's what they're going to do. They're just going to pick at whatever the government had an issue with, or whatever in general is an issue, and then blame it on the government. You might say that is true. But if you have on one hand the opposition painting a portrait of you as weak or irresponsive to the pandemic or not concerned with safety, you're not going to want to let that message just stand out there. So you're going to have to do something to either directly oppose that or counterbalance it. And so this, on one hand, pushes Ford to be stronger on certain things with COVID than he may otherwise want to be, or may otherwise think that the evidence is suggesting. So again, you have opposition pushing a party in one particular direction. The government doesn't want to go in that direction, but they cannot show weakness, or they cannot show inactivity on the criticism that they're getting, so they have to act in maybe another realm. And this is one of the reasons why political messaging is often such a hodgepodge, because that consistency, that clarity, and that simplicity that you're really looking for in messaging, it gets lost in the politics, because as we all have to remember, politics is ultimately about getting reelected. You can't do any of the things that you want to do, any of the things that you believe in or you think should be done, if you're not in office to be able to do them. And so the lens which you're constantly looking at the world through is a lens where, how is this going to be taken by the public? Now, I think a lot of politicians really need to focus on the overall messaging, because when you are successful, when you're a winner, people like that, and they will want to listen to you better. I think the governments need to stand up more. If they are making evidence-based decisions, they should really stand up and say that, instead of trying to be sort of, too smart by half. They're kind of, trying to think of ways to outfox the opposition. But being a straight shooter is generally a pretty good strategy in most scenarios, and I really think government needs to be consistent, especially with their COVID messaging, because ultimately this is a public safety, public health issue. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that next time you see some messaging coming out of the government, you'll maybe take a deeper look and see where is the opposition on this, what influences may have caused the message to be crafted in such a way, and definitely let me know what kind of messages you do see like that in the comments, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys think. So thanks again for watching. Again, I'm Sam Eskenasi, and have yourselves a great day.